What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Walkout Podcast.
We talk about fights, news, and more.
And today we're gonna bring you our reaction to UFC 322 that took place this Saturday, where, of course, Islam Makhachev defeated Jack Della Maddalena to become the double champ. But we're gonna start off by breaking down the main card, which started off with Dariush versus Saint-Denis. What did you make of this one?
Yeah, this was a interesting lightweight bout between two grapplers, or predominantly grapplers, but it ended up in a knockout win for Saint-Denis here, and which was, I thought, a really impressive knockout, but almost like we predicted, in our preview last week. We said that probably, Saint-Denis, he will just bring more energy, will just steamroll the older Dariush, even though I don't remember exactly the method we predicted, but I am surprised that he managed to knock him out in that fashion in round one, and so quickly also, just 16 seconds into the bout. Quite impressive, really, from Saint-Denis, and you know, looking forward, what do you think? Are there any good matchups for him coming up
Yeah,
here?
I mean,
We can talk about.
a real positive with such a quick win as that. I mean, I
Yeah,
barely saw it because I was like, oh, now the event's starting, and then I just heard the commentator shout, and I was like, what? It started like 15 seconds ago, and there, Dariush was laying on the ground, and the referee stepped in. So, of the little I saw, I mean, quickly for Dariush, possibly time to retire or just fight on some fight night or something. But the interesting one is, like you mentioned, Santini. Um, and yeah, like I mentioned, the real positive here is that he took no damage at all. So if he wants to, he can make a quick turnaround. Um, I think it's a bit difficult to pick him a good opponent, Santini, when you look at the lightweight rankings. But in my opinion, he needs a new, quite big test because Darush is quite highly ranked in the lightweight division. So to beat him in
yeah,
such easy fashion, I think he needs a new test, like when he fought Poirier, because even in the Poirier fight, even though he lost, he did do it incredibly well until the moment he got knocked out. So I would like to see him, just looking at the rankings here, the best fight I could see personally for him is the loser of Arman Sarukian and Dan Hooker on Saturday
yeah.
this week. And I predict that to be Dan Hooker, but I think he will get either lose on points or by a submission, and then he should be able to make quite a quick turnaround, and Santini as well. So possibly that fight can take place maybe like March, April next year. Uh, but I think it's a difficult one to pick because there are other good guys like Fisiev and Gamrot, but I think I would personally would like to see Santini in there with someone a bit better than that. Do you agree, or do you have another matchup in mind?
No, I think I agree. You want him to continue, especially at his age now, you want him to continue only climbing upwards the division. There's not really time for him to, defend his new position here in the rankings by meeting, new contenders or other guys. I think he wants to get further up the division, and as he took no damage, as you pointed out, he should be back quite quickly. And then I don't think he needs to make like a massive jump. He doesn't need to face Oliveira, even though he picked up a win, or Holloway. I think that someone like Dan Hooker, Gamrot, maybe even Justin Gaethje, but he probably needs to have another fight uh, quite soon since they haven't fought in a long time now. I would agree. I think Dan Hooker or Gamrot is a good, that's a good fight to still fighting upwards, but it's not a massive jump in competition, I would say, from Dariush actually at this point in Hooker's career. Gamrot is another type of, maybe a bit tougher opponent even for Saint-Denis because he has some really good wrestling. So, but considering what we saw against Dariush, Saint-Denis, he has a lot of momentum going for him right now,
Yeah.
and he does have some improved boxing or at least knockout power at least against like we saw against Dariush. So I think he would back himself against either Hooker or Gamrot, and I could definitely see those fights being made, and that's a good shout. I agree. So moving on down the card, we have the next fight here, welterweight bout between Leon Edwards and Carlos Prates, and of course, Carlos Prates took this one also with the knockout. Impressive, knockout that literally sent Leon Edwards flying across the octagon almost. He stumbled backwards and took quite a hit. And yeah, regarding Prates here, impressive win. I think he looked good. He handled the fight quite well, even though it was competitive for the first round, I thought, but still he did well. And yeah, what's next for Prates here?
I mean, yeah, again, we go back to rankings here just to see because I mean, this guy can really cause trouble for anyone. The way he smoked Edwards in the second round, I really did not expect it. I think Leon carried out the game plan well in the first round, but that's always the risk when you fight someone like Prates. It doesn't matter that you win the first round on points like Leon did when you eventually get smoked in the second like that. I mean, just that
Yeah.
image of Leon laying on the ground, kind of smiling, just being completely out of it. He has to take a lot of time off. But like you mentioned, the interesting one here is Carlos Prates because the man has some serious power, possibly the most I've maybe ever seen in the welterweight division. I mean, it's really, really something to behold. And when we take a look at the rankings, who do you want to see him in there against? I mean, another guy that we'll get on to soon here, Michael Morales. I think that could be a really interesting matchup since they won in quite similar fashion on Saturday. Um, Another name that's really big. And my point here, by the way, is that he needs a big name. I think after smoking a former champion like Leon Edwards like that, we want to see him in there with someone really, really good. And when he was in there with Ian Gary, of course he lost, but you could see that he had some success in the fifth round. So hopefully he's learned his lesson from that fight. And personally, I think for me it's Shavkat or Morales, and I think he has really good chance against them both. And after that, it's possibly a title shot. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree. I think that since it's such a impressive win, knocking someone like Leon Edwards out in that fashion, and as you said, maybe he has the most power that we've ever seen in the welterweight division, and I think it would be interesting to see him come up against Morales, another guy who has a lot of power, like we saw versus Sean Brady. But the only bad thing sort of about that bout would be it would, it would be a title contender eliminator. But I could see both of these guys arguing essentially that I want to go for the title straight off, or I want to go for someone else. They don't maybe want to meet each other,
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's true.
I could see Prates coming up against someone like Shavkat, since he won cleanly without no damage, and same thing for Morales actually. I think both Morales and Prates could either meet each other, or they could meet basically the same guys um, that are above them in the division. So, for example, Bilal Muhammad, if he loses versus Gary,
Gary, yeah, that's true.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
could
like
see
we've
that.
covered before, it's the welterweight division is a really, really difficult one to match up, right? There's so many
Yeah,
good fights to make, so it's sort of like just your personal preference, what you want to see, and it's hard to go wrong, really. I think.
yeah. I do think though that I think I saw Morales saying something in a post-fight press conference about he was not going to rush towards the title. He was going to be patient in getting a title shot, and so I could definitely see the UFC basically, especially with Dana White. I don't think that he's going to give him a title shot that quickly because there are so many contenders then in the welterweight division, like Prates, like Gary, who probably they're a bit older. They probably go before him towards the title shot, and I think that probably you will see Morales versus someone like Belal Muhammad maybe if he loses, and slowly building up. Quite a secure. I would definitely bet on Morales for that fight. So I think that's a good fight for him to set up another title shot if Prates loses his title shot, if he gets one next versus Islam, or if he gets fight versus Shavkat. So I could see Prates versus Shavkat and maybe Morales versus Bilal Muhammad. And if Gary wins versus Bilal, I could see him go for the title. Do you think that's a good lineup maybe of bouts upcoming in the welterweight division? Or this is something different here?
No, definitely. I think you're bang on there. That would be a really, really logical way to do it, actually. And just as you spoke about there, of course, next up on the card we have Michael Morales taking out the win
Yeah.
against Sean Brady there, and I can't make a better breakdown of what's next for both guys than what you just did. But quickly on the fight itself, firstly, I'm going to be a bit controversial and say that I think it was a bit of an early stoppage in such a big fight because the winner here is really set up for, if it's not a title shot, it is possibly a number one contender matchup, right? And to stop
Yeah.
someone like Sean Brady like that, I think he wasn't really out. Would have been out if the fight had gone on for a few more seconds, possibly. And you can argue that the ref just did his job and protected him from future brain damage, of course. But I think in this kind of bout, I mean, this was the featured fight on a card in Madison Square Garden. I mean, you have to let him go out with a bit more fight than that, but that's beside the point, probably. Um, I think that's something, I don't know if you agree, but I'm a bit shocked that Brady, I mean, he's, by the words of Islam Makhachev, one of the best wrestlers in the division and in the entire UFC. And for
Yeah.
Brady to barely shoot a takedown, of course you got to feel the other guy out, but if that's your weapon, you've got to utilize it, as we'll get on to, as Islam did, and as Shevchenko did in the co-main. So for Brady to stand in there with someone who is as dangerous as Morales and not go for the for the takedown early, you saw what happened. Um, so questionable decision making from him. Hopefully he'll learn the lesson for his next fight. Um, but what did you make of the overall performance here from both Morales and Brady?
Yeah, I mean, I agree mostly. I think it's a really interesting point, that you raised there with Brady not shooting for the takedown. I do think that one of the reasons for that maybe was that Morales, he came into the fight with a very weird sort of, low guard almost, and he has such a high, such a big reach advantage that I think that he basically banked on being able to not striking from the distance while still keeping that low guard. And he angled almost his legs in a sort of a way, it's almost like he proned forward. It wasn't really almost standing up completely when entering the striking range with Brady. So I do think that Brady should have gone for more takedowns, especially when it got more into the brawl of the fight, when they got close. But one of the main reasons I think why Brady didn't shoot is probably because Morales kept that low guard, and it's sort of difficult to shoot maybe against that when you got someone as big as Morales
That's true.
and as powerful. If he just throws a hook or something and he dives with his head right in there, like we
Oh,
saw almost with the knockout when he wobbled him, it wasn't a clean. It wasn't like Edwards Prates where it was a clean, lights out, but it was first I guess a wobble and then follow-up strikes. But I do agree almost that it was a bit of an early stoppage. I mean, Brady, he wasn't completely out. He was still in there, and he wasn't signaling anything, as if he was out of the fight or if he didn't want to continue. So maybe it was a bit early. And it would have been interesting to see the fight continue, but I just think that Morales' power, it was
yeah, it
it
wasn't
was really
ready for the
impressive.
power, right, Brady? That's what I take away
Yeah,
from it. Sorry
yeah,
to
I
interrupt you there,
think
but
so. No, that's fine. I think I agree with that. I think that he wasn't really ready for Morales' power there,
and
and
in his
we saw.
previous fights
Oh,
against Edwards and Burns, he hasn't really been punished when he has gone in for the takedowns, and now he had the same approach, and that's why I picked him because his takedowns and his wrestling is so strong. But when you can't apply it without getting punished, it's not worth barely anything. So all the credit goes to Morales here, and we're not going to break down further who we should face next because you did that so well previously. But what I think we can break down is the co-main event and one of the biggest female MMA fights ever, where Valentina Shevchenko, of course, beat Zhang Weili in quite dominant fashion in a fight which I don't want to, I mean, kind of start off by bringing this up, but the elephant in the room is that a lot of people left, and a lot of people, the ones who didn't leave, um, were on their phones. I mean, it just wasn't a great showing, if we're gonna be honest, right? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, we almost have we had a almost perfect card, and then you have two, I have to say, quite boring fights back to back. But this one takes the cake for the most boring fight on the card, and that is Shevchenko versus Shangwili. And you know, I almost felt bad for Shangwili, especially in the later rounds when Shevchenko was, you know, hitting her on the body with kicks and punches, and Weili was just, you know, grunting basically because he couldn't take it almost, and it just, I mean, this was obvious from the like second, third round. It was obvious that Shangwili was not ready for a fighter like Shevchenko. Just the size difference, the strength difference, weight difference, you know, too big, and she would have to go back down to the strawweight division. Um,
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean, sure, we have to say that it's incredibly impressive from Shevchenko, even though she's bigger and she's a former bantamweight, right? So to outwrestle someone who is a strawweight, I mean, you should be able to do that. But the reason why I at least picked Shangwili is because she's incredibly skilled in most areas, and especially in the grappling. So
yeah,
it is really impressive, but it's just not entertaining. And I mean, when you put on the Komen event spot of a pay-per-view, you have to do a bit more than that. I mean, they were getting booed in the last round. That's never a good look for such a big fight, right? Um,
yeah, it's really bad.
yeah, and I have to take a second as well to not. I don't want to critique Shevchenko too much because it's an incredible win, and in her shoes, I would probably have done the same when you face such good opposition and there's so much at stake. But we have to take a second to just bring some light onto the fact that the referees didn't stand them up a single time. And when someone is just, we'll get onto it with the main event, but when someone is just laying on top of someone else and not doing damage, you should stand them up a bit like they did at parts in the Duplessis Hamsat fight. Um, but that's part of the rules, right? If someone is not doing damage or advancing the wrestling to get to a submission or a potential finish, you should be stood up. That's just by the rules, and they didn't do that for a single time this fight, as far as I saw. So I thought that was a bit interesting as well. So uh, some criticism to Shevchenko, but a lot of criticism for the referees as well. And I think they need to do that in the upcoming title fight just to avoid it being as boring as this, because I don't think anyone wants to hear the booing in a co-main event, right?
Yeah, I agree. You know, I think that the referees need to stand up the fighters a lot more often, like you said, when they're just lying on top and collecting, especially, you know, essentially control time and
Yeah.
not advancing their position or attempting submissions. So, yeah, that was a quite bad fight actually. And as you said, people left the arena, people were looking at their phones even, and that's never a good sign when we're in a UFC co-main event. And speaking of main events, we have the main event coming up here. We have Jack Della Maddalena versus Islam Makhachev, where of course Islam Makhachev became two-time champion of the UFC, both former lightweight champion and now welterweight champion, achieving it in quite a dominant fashion. You know, some ways almost a boring fashion, but you have to respect it. He knows what he his areas, you know, where he is the strongest, and he used that to perfection almost. You know, completely dominating a guy like Jack Della Maddalena, who has had, who has showed, you know, decent grappling defense, decent sprawls, decent scrambling in previous fights versus other, you know, decent wrestlers, grapplers like Gilbert Burns, who has good BJJ, and also against Bilal Muhammad, who has good wrestling. So it's not like he's fighting someone who is completely clueless when it comes to wrestling, grappling in general. So it was a really impressive performance. But same thing here, almost people did start leaving. I saw actually in the fourth round almost. Not a lot of people, maybe as you know, Shevchenko versus Shangvili, but still there were some people leaving, and not everyone appreciated this fight. But I think that everyone can appreciate and should appreciate at least the achievement that we witnessed.
Yeah, definitely. And personally, I think it's harsh, very harsh to
Yeah,
criticize, as a lot of people do, a guy in Islam Makhachev who's dominated the lightweight division and then decide to move up and take on the champion. I mean, if the current champion took took this approach as Islam did against someone moving up, maybe I could stand differently on this. But that Islam does it, who goes up a weight class, I can't really critique that. And it's called mixed martial art for a reason. Sometimes the
Yeah.
fighters mix the arts in the and the styles in the same fight, and sometimes they do it in between fights because Islam has shown a lot of submission game, a lot of striking actually as well in his previous fights. But now he shows just a wrestling approach, which I think is a credit to Jack Della Maddalena, and Islam knew how dangerous he is, and that he would need to really control him in the grappling in just a way that, like you said, I think it's mental with just with Jack Della Madalena's takedown defense, how good that was against Bilal and Gilbert Burns. And Bilal Muhammad, as we covered in the previous, a really powerful and big welterweight and really good at wrestling. But it just didn't work now as it did against Bilal. I mean, I remember a moment that I actually noted down in round 5 when he looked completely broken, Jack, and he tried to sprawl and just couldn't do it. Islam took him down with ease, but in the Bilal fight, he was able to. And I do believe that Islam is a better wrestler, but I also believe that Bilal is a bit more powerful. So I honestly reckon that this came down to the fact that he was a bit broken. I mean, we've all seen by now the shots of, or what I mean, the the in the corner of
Yeah.
Jack Della
Yeah.
Maddalena's team when his
When he
coach was
completely
screaming at
broke.
him,
Yeah.
just like, "What are you doing? This is not the game
Sad
plan."
face off. I think the coach Ben Wickers even told him, "Get that sad-looking face off, or
Yeah,
get
yeah,
that sad
exactly.
off face
Yeah,
on him." So
like, what are you doing? He's used to being so
yeah,
calm and dominant. Um,
yeah.
so, what do you reckon about because obviously, as we've covered, it was a very dominant display of grappling from Islam. What we talked about previously, and what I thought Jack could bring him some issue with, is just the striking and his boxing. Do you think why wasn't Jack able to implement that in this fight? Do you think? I know it's a hard question, but
I mean, I think it does partly come down to just the takedown threat of Islam Makhachev, and I think especially because we saw in the first round, Jack came out with quite high energy, tried to bring some combinations toward Islam. Islam countered well with kicks, especially calf kicks we saw under the entire fight. He was really beating up Jack's lead calf when he was, I think, in the southpaw position. So
yeah.
that was quite impressive. And so I think one of the main reasons is probably because Jack was getting battered up with that calf kick. Maybe at least in the he started feeling that in the later rounds, impacting his mobility. But then also, I think just the takedown threat of Islam Makhachev, and Jack came in there. He tried to box with Islam, and he picked up. I think if we're to compare Morales Brady here and with the approach there, I think that the guard that Morales utilized, even though that would have, of course, not really been possible in the same way, since the size difference is not at all the same between Jack Della Maddalena and Islam Makhachev. They looked really similar. Even Islam looked bigger, I think, in
Yeah.
terms of body mass and body composition. So that wouldn't really have worked in the same way. But I think that Jack Della Maddalena, he still had, I think, five or no, sorry, something like 2 inches above maybe in reach, and so I think that he could have utilized that a bit more, lowering his guard a bit more so he can defend his hips a bit easier on the takedown. Um,
Mm.
he didn't really have any. So what happened over and over again is just he tried to blitz forward, throw in combinations, but he kept way too high of a guard, and Islam just ducked under because, of course, it's Islam Makhachev. It's incredible the way he somehow just scoops out takedowns from when they're so close to each other. And Jack Della Maddalena, he doesn't have any time to react, and he gets taken down. And Jack Della Maddalena, who we saw against Bilal, that we talked about already, against Gilbert Burns, decent takedown defense, decent scrambling, and I think that just speed of Islam in this fight and the power, the physical. We talked before in the preview about how Islam is going to translate to welterweight, and I think it translated really well. And I think we saw that in the fight that the strength, there was even a strength differential. I thought
Yeah.
Islam looked stronger even than Jack Della Maddalena in this fight, which I didn't think we would see beforehand. I even thought that, similar to Volk in the clinch versus Islam, I thought that maybe Jack could sort of bully him a little bit in the clinch, which I think we saw one point where he hit him with some body hooks or something in the clinch, but I think that was a single time during the fight.
Yeah.
I can't really remember any other time when that happened, except for I think it was in the third round or something. But still, I think that yeah, Jack wasn't able to stop Islam's takedowns. Returning to the original question, I went on a bit of a side tangent there, or to answer that. But I think that the reason why he wasn't able to stop the takedowns probably because he engaged way too high of a guard, I think, and he wasn't able to utilize his striking because then of the takedown threat, really. And Islam also is a really good, elusive, even though he might not be the best boxer per se, in the clinch or at least in close quarters, like for example Ilia Topuria. Still, Islam has like we saw, he has good kick, he has a really good kicking game, and he's just such a high IQ fighter in the way he utilizes. He moves around. It's very elusive with his movement, and I think that's also one of the main reasons why Jack wasn't able to hit him really that much. Because contrast to some other fighters, when they get hit on the body, they stand still. They are up against the fence. Islam just keeps moving him away. He doesn't just stand still, even if he gets hit.
Yeah.
So,
That's
do you
true.
agree with that? Do you think that's a decent comparison, or
Yeah, totally. I mean, just really well put forward and technical breakdown there
yeah,
from you. So, and I do agree with basically every single point that you brought up there. I have to say, I mean, just quickly, as you said, the boxing from JDM, I think he had a bit of success in the first round quickly,
yeah,
but then you could just see the confidence drained from his face, as we already mentioned. And I mean, the best part of his entire night was his walkout when he came out with
yeah,
TNT from AC/DC, and I thought, okay, maybe it's got something here. And then it just went from bad to worse. And as we said, ended up with his coach being desperate, just screaming in his face between the fourth and the fifth, like, you got 5 more minutes to put some damage on this guy. Do something. I mean, that's always frustrating. We've seen it before with a lot of fighters, like Leon Edwards, for instance, where the coach just isn't getting through to their fighter, and
yeah.
Jack wasn't responding really. And I think that's never a good sign. And of course, he's quite young, so he can bounce back. But this is a really tough one for Jack. If we're quickly here going to speak on what's next for these guys, of course, the interesting one is Islam Makhachev. But just quickly on Jack, I think that needs some work, and you need to have that. Like, if you, is it possible to build that mentality and just a new relationship with your coach in terms of actually being able to absorb the critique and work on those things? I mean, it's really difficult to say, but I think he's going to need a bit of time off here, personally, Jack, because not because he took a lot of damage, but purely because just to, I mean, rebuild that relationship with his coach and work on filling some of those holes. And in my opinion, it's almost pointless to say who's next for Jack, because if he's gonna take like maybe 6 months or something like that off, we don't. The welterweight division is so stacked, so we don't really know where all these guys will be at. But the more interesting one is Islam Makhachev. I mean, who do you want to see him in there against next?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered, very well the reality of the situation here with Jack Della Maddalena, and I actually, um, that's another really big reason, probably because of why his striking game really didn't work that well, especially in the later rounds. Even if Islam would have gotten tired, Jack just didn't have any emotional energy left. He didn't have any momentum left at all after lying under Islam for several rounds. So that's a really big reason probably for why the fight just worse and worse as it went on
Yeah,
in the later rounds. But regarding Islam Makhachev, of course, the new welterweight champion, I think there are different alternatives for him coming up. I know that he has talked about. I think, or no, I think I saw Volkanovski say something about that he should maybe meet or fight against Kamaru Usman. I don't really agree with that because I think that Usman, even though he had an impressive win versus Joaquin Buckley, wasn't a good run until then. I think there are so many others in this division who are more deserving right now, at least, and I think that
Yeah, it's quickly
Usman.
there. Sorry to interrupt you, but if you haven't seen it, Islam Makhachev was actually interviewed the day after the fight and said
Yeah, and he also said that.
Usman himself, but he also said I would prefer Usman because he's such a legend in the welterweight division. But it's not up to me. Basically, he said something on the likes of we'll see what they choose. So I don't think he really, even though he's a double champ, he doesn't have much say in it. Um, but sorry to interrupt you. I just thought that was interesting to bring up as well. That his preferred target there would be
Yeah,
Kamaru Usman. But go ahead.
yeah. I was actually thinking like because I know that I saw Volk said it, and I think that I maybe saw Islam said it, but I wasn't sure. So it was good that you brought that up because I wasn't completely sure if Islam said that also. But yeah, then that has even more validity to it if Usman was to get that title shot. But I just don't think that he is deserving of it right now. Even if of course you could always say that Usman maybe maybe he is the welterweight goat. I don't know exactly, but he's definitely up there in that discussion. And so,
Yeah, but you have to look at form as well, though.
yeah,
So
exactly. I was gonna just say that on the record and on the greatness of the fighter, you could probably say that Usman should be number one. But the rankings aren't determined by that. The rankings are determined by how good the fighters actually are right now. And looking at the rankings, I think that we have other guys who are more uh, were more deserving of the title shot. And I think that one of those could be Ian Gary, like we
yeah,
talked about before, if he wins versus Bilal Muhammad this weekend.
yeah.
Do you agree with that, or do you think there's someone else here, maybe Prates or Morales, or
I mean,
it's difficult
personally,
to
I
say.
don't want to give them. I know Pratis wants a title, of
Yeah,
course, he's gonna want it, but he thinks he has fair case as well for a title shot. Quickly on Usman, I respect him a lot. I think, like you said, with the goat thing, it's him or GSP. I personally
yeah,
believe that Usman is the goat of the welterweight division, but you just can't give someone a title shot when he's fought once in the last 2 years, and that was an all right win against Buckley. But before that, he had 3 straight losses. So I mean, you shouldn't give him, even though he's a legend, you shouldn't give him the title shot there.
no.
But as you said with Ian Gary, sorry,
Sorry to interrupt you, but that would be like giving Izzy a title shot after, maybe picking up a win versus someone like Dolidze or, a bottom level
yeah,
middleweight
exactly,
almost.
exactly. But the thing here is, I know that they treat John Jones very well and better than anyone else, but they gave Miocic a title shot just purely because of the fact
Yeah,
that Jones wanted that fight. So UFC can do this, especially when it comes to the legends and creating these what they think are the biggest matchup. But we who are a bit more hardcore fans when it comes to UFC,
yeah,
we want to see the most, I mean, the ones who are deserving. And you mentioned a few very interesting names there. Personally, I would like to see Morales or Prates have like a number one contender matchup before they get the title shot. Either if that's against each other, or maybe if they want to have a tough fight each, like someone like a Gary, Bilal Muhammad, Shavkat. We want to see, like we've mentioned previously, we want to see these welterweights actually fight each other so that we can get a clear cut number one contender. Because I also want this next fight for Islam to mean something. I think if he fights, say, he fights Michael Morales next, and we think, oh, he's undefeated, he's a good striker, and Islam goes in there and out wrestles him, it will be like, oh, not a lot of people would put that much stock into it. And I think, as you said, if Ian Gary defeats Bilal Muhammad on Saturday here, I I personally believe, even though I don't like him as a person, but that's beside the point, I think he has a really strong case for a title shot because he had a close fight with Shavkat, then beat Prates recently. Prates is one of the best guys in the division. If he then beats former champion Bilal Muhammad, if he does it in a good way, I can't believe that he will get the title shot. If it's like a boring decision, which it sometimes is when Ian Gary fights, maybe he'll need another one. But probably those 3 names are that you mentioned are the most likely: Morales, Prates, and Ian Gary, depending on how well they do, right?
yeah, I agree. And I think that Ian Gary, if we're because the UFC nowadays isn't only, skill based when it comes to matchmaking and especially on the title fights. They also want to get the pay, or we will see if that changes when with the Paramount deal. But I still think that they're gonna chase headline fights,
Yeah.
To sell tickets at least. And so if we're looking at it from that way, I think that two guys who could sell the fight really well would probably be Ian Gary and Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman because he's a super big name, but I don't think that he deserves that title shot. But Ian Gary because of he's Irish, Islam is from Dagestan. There's
Yeah.
a bit of a Khabib
McGregor rivalry, right?
McGregor connect. It could be at least a bit of a. They're definitely gonna build that if they organize this title shot for Ian Gary. They're definitely gonna try to build that image of this fight, to be sort of McGregor, the continuation of McGregor and Khabib.
Yeah.
So that could be really interesting, and I definitely think that the UFC are looking at that, and Dana White is looking at that, rubbing his hands, thinking I'm gonna sell tickets on this one, on that matchup. I don't think that he's looking at Michael Morales from Ecuador, who I really do think, just looking at how Morales put Sean Brady, who I really, really did rate as probably maybe the biggest threat to Islam in the division. I do think that Morales might have a chance at actually knocking out Islam Makhachev, which sounds crazy, but the difference in just how big Michael Morales is, he doesn't even look like a welterweight. I think he looks like a middleweight, almost a light heavyweight actually, but definitely a middleweight.
Yeah.
I think that if there's anyone who's gonna have a good chance of maybe going up and just in a flash KO, if he picks up the same style of guard that he had and we will see, but if he can block the takedowns, then I think that he might be able to knock out Islam, and I don't think that the UFC wants to see that. And I don't either think that the UFC wants to gamble a guy like Morales if he does get, which you pointed out. I think there's a stronger likelihood of him just being the same way that Jack Della Maddalena was handled, probably even being submitted, because I don't think that he has as good wrestling defense as JDM has. So either you're wasting a really good young talent in Michael Morales, or you're wasting basically your biggest, maybe one of the biggest stars in the UFC in Islam Makhachev and the pound for pound number one. So you don't want to waste either of those two, and I think that Prates could be interesting. I think that fight might sell better, or definitely would sell better because Prates has a bit of a fan base, with the cigarette smoking and stuff like that. He's a bit of a meme. But I don't think there's no seriousness to that fight. Almost, I don't think that Prates would be champion. I think Prates gets submitted. I haven't really seen what he can do against. We saw a bit versus Lynn Edwards, but you can't compare Lynn Edwards to Islam Makhachev
No.
in terms of the wrestling. So I don't think that fight goes any differently than an Islam Makhachev sub. It might look a bit, it might be similar to Moicano versus Islam almost, but a bit better for Prates. It might go like 2 rounds, maybe 3 rounds even, and Islam backing off on the feet, letting Prates, trying to push forward, but shooting for takedowns, getting him down, and then eventually get submitted. I would probably predict something like that. So from if we're talking about selling the fight here, I think that Ian Gary is and also, who deserves it. I think that Ian Gary probably offers maybe the most competitive fight here, and also the one who sells the best.
Yeah. Just quickly to add on to what you said there, because I do agree with your points, and I think it's not a crazy take at all actually that Morales could knock out Islam Makhachev, just because he's definitely the hardest hitter that Islam has ever fought if they were to fight.
Yeah.
Just like you said, because of his size, but also because of his striking. So I think that definitely would be a dangerous fight. And the real UFC and MMA fans will know of Morales and how good he is, and of course he's undefeated. But I don't think that the worldwide fan base maybe
No.
acknowledge him so much. And when Islam fights, you want him to fight a good guy. So Ian Gary can really sell a fight, not because of his previous fights, because they are traditionally very boring, but just on his trash talk alone. And another interesting fact that I just looked up here is that Ian Gary is 191 centimeters tall. That's approximately 6'3". So he's a very big guy for Islam Makhachev to fight, and he hasn't really had that frame for an opponent previously. And that doesn't say all that much, but it can be difficult when Islam is used to fighting guys who are like 175, 180-ish to face someone
Yeah,
that big. And Ian Gary is a very, very good technical striker, good submission games, of course, trains with Charles Oliveira. So if he beats Bilal Muhammad this weekend, I would probably agree with you and say that, Ian Gary should be next for the title, really.
yeah. No, I think that's I agree with that also. As we both pointed out, I think that Ian Gary is the probably the best option here for a title shot, both from a marketability standpoint and you know who has the best possible fight to bring to Islam Makhachev here. Because as I said before, even if I do think that Morales he has a chance of a flash knockout, I want to make it clear here just that I'm not saying that I would bet on him doing that,
No,
or that
no.
there's even a 40% chance. What I mean is that he might be the only one here who has a puncher's 25% chance probably of doing it
Yeah.
in a 5-round fight, and that is if he doesn't get submitted, which I don't know much at all about. I know that Morales actually has think a decent wrestling background, but we haven't seen him. The only thing we saw was Brady, and as we both said, Brady, or as you covered, Brady he wasn't able to shoot for any takedowns, and just the fact that Morales himself wasn't, he was more focused on preventing Brady's takedowns than shooting on his own, shooting for his own takedowns probably does prove that he rates his striking more than Brady than he rates, his wrestling versus Brady. And if he doesn't rate his wrestling versus Brady, he probably doesn't rate it at all versus Islam Makhachev. So I think that going into that fight, I wouldn't bet on Mikey Morales, but I think it would just be a bad fight for the UFC to make. You know, either wasting a really young talent like Morales, who's undefeated, with that knockout power he has, or wasting, two-time champion Islam Makhachev
Yeah.
by a flash KO. I don't think that's a
It's not worth it, right?
good fight to make. Yeah, it's not worth it. And sure, Prates also probably has a puncher chance, but I don't think that Prates is as imposing almost as Mikey Morales here from what we've seen so far. So I think that Islam definitely puts Prates away by submission. I think if they fight. So,
Yeah,
but I
that's
think
fair.
Gary is probably has the best chance of of putting up an overall good, exciting fight to watch. Probably.
Yeah, that's a good point. And he
Um,
has beaten Protus previously as well. So,
yeah,
but all in all, we have to say that it was a really good card. The main and the co-main maybe disappointed, at least me to some degree, and most fans when you
yeah.
saw that some of the fans in the arena actually left early. I mean, that's insane, especially when you consider like the ticket prices and all that. But until that point, it was a really good. We don't really cover the prelims here as well, but they were good as well on this card, we have to say. And the first three fights on the main card were all very spectacular. So all in all, very stacked and very entertaining card here. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a great card, only sort of let down by by the co-main and the main event, which is sad because both of them, both of the co-main and the main fight looked like they were gonna be, super fights. And
Yeah.
of course, they were super fights in their own right because of how much they meant, or how much, how important they were for the UFC, but they didn't really show up that level of, you know, they were cautious fights, if you have to say anything about them.
Yeah.
And that's
Maybe it was
both
too much on the line.
yeah, maybe it was too much on the line. Exactly. But when everything is at stake, you have to come up with the thing that works for you. And I think that Islam showed that were well. And I think that Valentina Shevchenko also, they did what they had to do to get the win. And you have to respect that in some sense. It's still a sport, It's not only an entertainment business. It's still a professional sport, and it does show that it really does matter for these guys to just get the win, to get it done,
That's very
not
true.
only to show up and be entertaining.
Yeah, totally, totally. So yeah, we look forward to a lot of more stacked events, hopefully next year, like you mentioned with the Paramount deal there. But that's our complete reaction and breakdown of UFC 322. So thank you guys a lot for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah, catch you guys next time. Goodbye.
Bye.